All right, guys, welcome back to Within Tolerance. This is episode 43, and we are joined by Eric from Orange Vise. And I'm really excited for this episode. I know Dylan and I have been talking about this for a while. So, Eric, started off, how did you get into manufacturing? How did you get into machining? And then, like Dylan said, we'll get into the questions after that.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, guys. I'm pretty excited to be on the on your podcast. Been listening for a while, and I'm pretty much a self-taught machinist. I did not grow up in a manufacturing family. My dad was a software engineer. Um, so, uh, in early childhood, I guess, or middle school, high school, I was into RC, mountain bikes, all that stuff, and I didn't even know what a milling machine was until I got into college. In college, I went to UCLA, majored in computer science and engineering, which is it's mostly computer science with a little bit of emphasis on electrical engineering, but mostly on the like a software firmware development side. And so that's where I started getting interested in machining. I basically snuck into like the Mechie lab. Not really snuck in because their doors wide open. They don't really care who goes in and out. But I'd go into like their scrap bin and be like, "Hey, you guys need this?" And they'd be like, "Nope." And I just grab it and take it home. And I have like a little Harbor Freight um, mini mill in my living room, and also use some of their machines in the lab. And so that's where I started getting interested in all that good stuff. And those were the early days of a lot of the internet forums, Practical Machinist, CNC Zone. That's when all those started popping up. So that's where I learned a lot of my stuff. I also rented some DVDs, those Daryl Holland machinist DVDs from way back when. And
Oh, cool.
yep, and little by little, that's how I cut my teeth, just doing it the hard way. After college, I moved back home with my parents for a few years, messed around in the garage for a while. I was mostly doing woodworking at that point, but I always had both metalworking machines and woodworking machines, and eventually settled on the metal stuff. And that's really because when I was doing woodworking, I was for a short period of time I was building furniture for people, and everybody always wanted something different. And that's where I realized, all right, machining is something where you design something and you can make something, X number of times, and people will usually, I mean, if they have any sort of like customizations or whatever, um, there are little minor tweaks in here and there, but with woodworking, it was kind of like a free for all. People would want something completely off the wall, and I'd be like, I don't know if I can do that. So that's what got me more into uh, machining, and built CNC routers and all that stuff. And with vises, I kind of just fell into it. I saw an opening in the market, like most things, and I didn't really want to get into. Well, at that time, I guess I got into machining for the sake of machining, and so my interests at the time were really just machining. So at that point, I was still mountain biking and stuff like that, but I wasn't as I didn't have the fever as hard as I did back in high school. So every time my mind would be on machining related stuff. So that's why I got into an industry that's machining related. And so a lot of people know about the history of the late 2000s, where I was working with a different company. I'm not going to get into that a whole lot, but in 2012, that's when we started Orange Vise Company. We being my wife and I, and we were bootstrapping for quite a while. And yeah, for the first 2 years, it was just my wife Catherine and I. Just basically doing everything, manufacturing, packing, shipping, taking orders, all that stuff, making videos. And so we started out in Orange County, and that's where the name Orange Vise comes from. And yeah, so I mean, it just grew from there, little by little. We the company, for the most part, has grown pretty organically. We do our fair share of advertising, videos, and that kind of stuff, but it isn't like we don't try to shove our product down people's throats. We kind of let it. We put something out there and kind of let the market dictate the popularity and kind of how it gets shaped and stuff like that. And so it's been that was 2012 when we first started, and so I guess we're going into our 9th year.
That's awesome. I mean, it's definitely been really cool as somebody who has bought your products to see how far you guys have grown and all of that. I know we've got a Gen 1, I think a Gen 3 and a Gen 4, and now a few of the Delta Vices. So
Right.
it's cool to kind of see the span of, all of that.
Yeah, so like the pretty much everything up to Gen 3 was pretty much built by either me directly or a combination of me, my wife, and my dad. So my dad got involved a little bit. He was already retired at that point, but he was during years 3 and 4, he was involved in some of the stuff. So he was just trying to find something to do after retirement.
That's cool.
Yep.
Well, very cool. So I guess we can jump into the questions. So what you've now come up with quite a few product lines. What spurs on a new product? For example, like the bench vise. Like, how do you go about deciding where to invest your R&D time and resources, and then how do you go about developing a product?
Yeah, so like I guess it depends on our like our timeline, like where we are in our timeline, which dictates what we'll invest our time and effort in. So early on, we didn't want to be the type of, or I should say, we didn't want to reinvent the wheel back then. So we wanted to do something that was kind of the conservative, safe approach. So yeah, so we would basically we went into the 3-axis vises because that's where we saw the opening in the market, and that was the most conservative approach at that time. Later down the road, we came out with the Delta vises, and those are obviously a little bit more oriented towards multi-axis milling setups, and that was deviating a little bit from what we were previously making, and from our design, you can see that we're kind of in our own little niche there because our design is fundamentally different than the self-centering vises out on the market. But so that was kind of like one foot out the door, one foot still in the door, where we're still making work holding for CNC machinists, but we're starting to step away from our comfort zone. And then with the bench vise, that was yet another step in that direction, where it's still a vise, but now we're trying to open up to a completely different audience. And that was done for a couple of reasons. First reason being, by opening up to a new audience, we're no longer, I guess you say, cannibalizing our own existing product line. So any new sales in that realm does not eat away from sales in our current line. And it was also just a way of just gaining some brand recognition by expanding our market. And another big thing, I guess, with the bench vise is that we kind of worked backwards in a lot of ways. We had the idea for building a bench vise for a few years, and we didn't know exactly how we wanted to make it. But the way we ended up settling in on that particular design is we wanted to offer something unique that didn't necessarily completely overlap the existing purpose and utility of bench vises on the market. So the purpose isn't to say completely replace a Wilton bullet, which you can see it takes some design aspects from. It's more for filling in the gaps where the existing bench vises might not fulfill all your needs. And there's and being having an aluminum construction, there's it opened up something we haven't had a lot of in the past, which is color. The importance of color is something that I kind of gleaned from the bike industry. I've seen a lot of so I've been mountain biking pretty consistently for 25 years, and sometimes people will buy certain products just because of certain colors available. And in the machinist market, the importance of that is not as apparent initially, but I think that's one of the things we're kind of experimenting with. But I think a bench vise has a certain vanity aspect, because when you bring a customer into your shop, they're not really going to look inside your machine and be like, oh, what kind of vises you got? They're going to see that bench vise front and center. And so right now our vise is available in a very dramatic black and orange color scheme, but we're going to be starting to introduce them in other colors. So the idea would be to have that color match your company's colors, so that you kind of have a theme going on in your shop, because appearances do matter, at least when you're trying to get new customers.
Totally. Yeah, that's I know it might not matter to customers, but I know as like a machinist looking at other machinists, Instagrams or anything like that,
Right.
like you can tell in a flash whether it's, Kurt blue or Chick red or Orange Vice orange, like
Right.
it doesn't take more than them panning over their machine for you to know what work holding they're using. So it's definitely, I would agree, definitely important on that
Yep.
end.
Yep. And I mean, we always have continuing on that question, we always have an endless list of products we're looking to, where we brainstorm and think about making. And the bench vise just happened to be the next in line that we thought was the best use of resources. But yeah, manufacturability is always a really important aspect of any product we want to come out with. So the aluminum construction of the bench vise was something that we wanted to do, because we historically all of our products have been cast iron, hardened steel, and that kind of stuff. And we were looking for a product where we wouldn't have to worry so much about tool life all the time. We didn't make the product aluminum because of that, but rather it was the fact that it was aluminum that brought it kind of to the front of the line.
Totally. So as far as the base ideas for all of these products, are they problems that you encounter day to day? Like, were you looking for a better bench vise, or for, like, for example, you mentioned the Delta vices, like, had you been using other fourth axis and fifth axis vices and seeing the downsides, I guess, to a self-centering vice, and that's what made you come up with the design? Or is it feedback from customers, or what's the leading thing for you to start down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above. So it's when certain, like when the stars align, I guess, when we have a need for something and the customers also ask for something, and all of that stuff becomes priority. And even more importantly, when a customer basically comes to us and says, "Hey, if you make this, we're going to buy them," then that's certainly a large contributing factor to what gets products rolling. And so with like the Delta vise, it's sold as a multi-axis vise. We don't really call it a 5-axis vise, because I think multi-axis definitely includes a lot of 4-axis applications, especially horizontals. And we've had a lot of obviously we've had people who watched our who followed us for the last few years know that we're all about horizontals. And we were looking for something that would really work well in a tombstone, in like a 400 or 500 millimeter horizontal machining center. And basically we designed what we wanted to use. And it's not just the performance, but also the cost. We've had some customers who didn't believe in pallet pools, but still wanted the extremely long run times of horizontals. So a local customer of ours decided to just get 2 pallet horizontals, which is the standard, no pallet pool attached. And on each pallet, they would have 6-sided tombstones, and on each side they have 4 vises. So they just jam-packed vises on those tombstones. So they can run 48 parts at a time.
Jeez.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, because I think they were. This was like a fairly mature machine shop, but it's not so big that it had multiple owners or anything like that. So it's a single owner machine shop where the guy was kind of semi-retired, but not really. And he would walk into his shop, and his lead machinist would be like, "Okay, yeah, I'm running these parts, running a standard tombstone vise setup, holding 8 parts." per tombstone, and they're running 13/8 stainless and pretty difficult to cut materials. And they would just be babysitting a small number of parts at a time. And the owner was just thinking, yeah, we got to get more productive, got to get in on this lights out action. And that's when they gave us a call.
Awesome.
So, Eric, going back to like the bench vise and the delta vices, are you the one designing these and prototyping these? Like, if you come in one day and you're like, all right, this bench vise, I've been thinking about it. Are you the one that's drawing it, going out to machine, making prototype parts? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'm doing most of that stuff. I do get feedback from employees. Sometimes I get feedback from friends, but yeah, for the most part, I'm the one designing and programming all that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah,
I guess, was it customer feedback that made you, because you just recently expanded the Delta Vice line to have two more sizes? Was that already planned in the pipeline, or was that people saying, "Hey, I actually need a bigger Delta Vice"?
yeah. So both. So it was planned, but it's one of those things where you kind of sit on it until someone's knocking on your door and saying, "Hey, I need this." And so a lot of these ideas actually come from the Instagram crowd. So a lot of people we know on Instagram, and then other people just sometimes we just chat and they just throw out ideas like, "Hey, you should make a longer one," or and we designed it from the beginning to kind of have that sort of function or a modularity, because we did the same thing with our 6-inch vices where we started out with a 20-inch and a 17.5-inch length. And then before we knew it, we had 5 sizes. Mostly interchangeable parts, but mostly just like an elongated body and adjusted screw length. So
Yeah, totally. I love that about my vices. I actually have my 14-inch jaws and everything in my custom 12-inch body right now, and my brother, because it just worked for a part that I needed, but because I needed the Delta pallet uh, jaws for it. So
right on.
yeah, but it's nice to just be able to hot swap stuff, and it's like, oh, I can't find a fixed jaw screw. I'll just go look for it, and they're all the same, and it's all the same,
Nice.
functioning stuff. So
Yeah, I think I remember that 12-inch vise because I didn't make too many of them.
yeah, I wouldn't expect it, but it fit perfectly in our Kitamura palette.
Nice.
So I definitely, we were using a Kurt turn sideways up until then and banging our hands against the palette, trying to tighten it and all that stuff. So
Gotcha.
it was ideal for sure.
Nice.
So, Eric, what's the number one consideration when you're automating and trying to run something lights out? You have a big production run of, let's say, just whatever's most standard in your shop, or even like the bench vices. When do you like say, okay, we need to make this for overnight running and, not have someone babysit it like you were mentioning that local shop was kind of running into?
Right. Yeah. So because we started from, we didn't really release the bench vise until recently. We were mostly making everything out of steel and cast iron, and a lot of those parts were machined in the hardened state. So with any sort of material where tool life is a concern, tool life is always going to be the number one factor that's going to determine success of an overnight operation. You can kind of get away with it during the day, because if the machine starts squealing really loud, it catches people's attention. They'll run to the machine and see like, hey, what's going on here? But once you run overnight, it's kind of a crapshoot. So you really have to be on top of your tool life management, and that's not just. And the machine can do a lot with the right machines. We've always been a big fan of DMG Mori machines, and it's because my history with that company goes back when they were still just Moriseki. But the tool life management on the newer machines is really good. It's really easy to pinpoint exactly which tools are about to wear out, which tools have plenty of life left, and all that stuff. And that's largely determined by trial and error. But putting timers on every single tool is, I would say, the number, or I should say, the first step in getting tool life management nailed down. And then after that is kind of looking through the process and determining which tools fail. It's actually not about which tools fail sooner and which tools fail later. It's more about which tools fail consistently. So if you have a tool that lasts 120 minutes and the next time it lasts 90 and then the following time it lasts 180, that's not very consistent. That's going to give you bad numbers. And then it's just a matter of time before you look at a tool that's like hits your low end of the timer and you're like, I could run this another 60 minutes. And you consistently start doing that. And then one day it breaks at 80 and then you end up with some sort of crash. So having tools that you can trust and consistently fail based on the timers, that's really important. And so tools would be number one, and then in a distant second would be your work holding. Just because work holding is a little bit less likely to, I mean, it can still fail, but in our experience, I think maybe it's just because of the it's a volume issue. You know, we have a lot more tools than we have work holding setups. Even on the machines with the large pallet pools, you know, 10 work holding setups, 20 work holding setups versus 120 tools. What's more likely to have one failure? It's just sheer numbers. So
those tool trackers, is the control doing that, or are you physically like timing the tool?
yeah, the control's doing it. So every time it pulls up a tool, there's a tool life management screen, and every tool has its both a serial number and the actual tool number. So let's say normally you say tool 5. In the DMG Mori control, it'll be, rather than T5, it'd be T10005 or T20005. So I took out or got rid of the leading zeros on the serial number side, but you can have duplicates of the same tool. But basically, what you do is you load up all your tools in that library, and you set the timers. And you can either set the timers by number of uses or number of minutes. I like using number of minutes because that allows you to use that same tool across multiple programs. If it was a dedicated machine making a single part, you might use the instances where it gets called up, and that would be your timer. But yeah, it's all done in the control. And as soon as one tool is expired, the machine will automatically try calling the next basically sister tool, basically the duplicate tool of the same tool number. So in your program, even though you might only use T5, the control will select whether it's T10005 or T20005.
Gotcha. So same tool, but the control does that on the fly.
Correct.
Okay.
So speaking of machinery, what's the current lineup at Orange Vise? Because you guys have kind of gone through the gamut over the years. I mean, I know you've had a S1000, you've had some Doosan, some Haas, some DMGs. What's your current lineup look like?
Okay, yeah. So our original NHX 4000 Gen 1, we traded that in for a second generation NHX 4000 with a 5 pallet pool. Then we've got a NHX 6300. That's it's a 50 taper, 630 millimeter horizontal. Then we've got a NHX 4000 with a 21 pallet pool.
Oh, wow.
Then we've got a Doosan NHP 4000 2 pallet machine. So those are our 4 horizontals. And then we've got an NLX 2500 SY, also DMG Mori, live tooled subspindle lathe. That was purchased in 2014. And we've got the Okamoto 32 by 80 grinder, surface grinder.
That thing's crazy cool. I remember seeing that in Saunders's walkthrough your shop, how it actively balances the wheel and stuff.
Yep. That's one of those machines where it doesn't have a whole lot of bells and whistles, but
it doesn't need it.
It doesn't need it, and it's so stout that, you know, it'll destroy grinding wheels and keep on going. And,
that's scary.
We've had a few close calls, but so far it's been solid. So
awesome.
Yep. Let's see what else we got. We have that Brother M140 X1. I actually ended up moving that to my home garage.
Oh,
no way.
Yeah. So that was originally used to make our ball receivers, our quick change ball receivers. We ended up doing a design tweak on that, so we no longer make that part on that machine. But I have high hopes for using that machine for a lot of R&D and things to come.
That's so cool.
And then lastly, in late 2019, we picked up a Haas VF5 and a Makino U3 wire EDM.
Oh, cool. What are you using the wire for?
So that was originally so a lot of the stuff I like to do now in terms of new product design, I like to work backwards. So rather than designing a product and deciding how am I going to make it, I instead want to get the machines and be like, these are the machines I want to use. Make sure I have enough capacity, and then let's work backwards and see what can I make with those machines. So the wire EDM was originally going to be used to make hydraulic vises. That's
Oh, really?
that's kind of taken a back seat for now. Originally, it was going to be possibly like an IMTS release. We backed out of IMTS for now. I don't know what's going to happen with that, considering all the current events with COVID-19 and stuff like that. But we've got that on the back burner for now. But we've got a lot of other stuff. Without getting too much into it, some precision hand tools.
Oh, cool.
That I think could really benefit from the accuracy of wire EDM. And just rewinding just a little bit, when we talked about tool life management and tool life, basically tool life being the main factor in lights out machining, I think wire EDM is basically the pinnacle of tool life management, because all you've got is wire. You look at your spool and it says, do I have any? And if you do, then you're good.
Right.
So that's that.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. So was the Haas I had heard was bought for making the subplates? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the full table subplates as well as our pallets.
Okay, awesome.
Yep.
And actually, along with the pallets, I kind of wanted to pick your brain. So what made you change? Because you had a Bollock system, people seem to really like it. What made you want to reinvent that and go to the pull stud system that you now have on your Delta Vices and your subplates and all that?
Okay, so I guess it's kind of when we're talking about pallets, I was mostly talking about Vise pallets, but
Okay, I got you.
But yeah, but I'll answer your question first. So the ball coupler design, there's still a place for both styles. So the benefit of the ball coupler design is that there's zero stack height in a horizontal application. You can just mount the receivers directly into a cast iron tombstone, and without having to have an extra plate to give you access to some sort of actuating mechanism. And so it kind of goes back to what I said earlier about how we use products for our own use first. So in a horizontal application, ball couplers are generally going to be more effective than some sort of 0-point system. The big for any of the listeners who aren't really familiar with the product lines, the ball coupler system is a ball lock that actuates from the top, or I should say, it actuates from the whatever's being fixtured, whereas a 0-point system actuates from the subplate. And so in a horizontal application, especially 400 millimeter horizontals, where you don't really have that much travel, they're usually about 22 inches cubed. Stack height is really important, because once you turn that tombstone 90 degrees and start machining on the side, you run out of x-axis travel really, really quickly. So even an inch can make the difference between being able to machine something and having to use a completely different setup. And so that's why we started out with the ball coupler system. But there are other applications where it really benefits to have actuation from the subplate rather than from what's being fixtured. So, for example, on a multi-axis vise, sometimes you want to be able to rotate the vise 90 degrees, or index it 90 degrees, or any angle for that matter, without having to take the part out of the vise. And the ball coupler had the problem of having to basically disassemble most of the vise in order to actuate that screw. And so that's kind of where that came about.
Gotcha. And it seems like it's a lot more cost effective if you're making, mini pallets or anything like that to go on those. I know I was surprised when I bought the pull studs how much or how inexpensive they are.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we basically price everything based on how much they cost to make. And how much they cost to make is almost always pinned to cycle times. So,
Oh, awesome. That's
yep.
really cool.
Interesting. So we have a question here. What has been the best purchase you've made for Orange Vise?
It's hard to pinpoint any one thing, but because you always kind of have a little bit of bias towards your most recent purchases.
Yeah.
But barring that, I think, or with that in mind, having a little bit of a biased viewpoint, I think the 21 pallet horizontal is our best purchase, and obviously that would have been a dream machine from day one. But what it's really done is it's gotten rid of a lot of the setups. So imagine like if just take a lathe setup for instance. Imagine if every time you needed to run a part, you just walk to a different lathe or something like that. And that's basically what it's like to have a horizontal with 21 pallets.
So I got a question. Is that machine running right now?
It is, yes.
That's awesome.
That is really cool.
Yeah. So
yeah, I didn't realize you guys had 4 horizontals. That's impressive. That's really cool.
Yep. Yeah, I think it'd be hard for us to go get a step away from that from horizontals at this point in time. We've thought about picking up 5-axis machines, and we may very well do so in the future. But right now, it's just the productivity of horizontals for us is what works. And I think the biggest difference between a horizontal and a 5-axis is part density. 5-axis machines, even if you have some of those like angled nests of tombstones, that can hold like a few parts, it won't compare to a horizontal. Our densest tombstone we've made so far was one on our 630 millimeter machine that held 36 carriers at a time.
Wow.
And so you guys know the size of that. It's a pretty big hunk of cast iron to begin with. I think something like 12 pounds. So to hold 36 at a time, and even it was a fairly conservative program, but it'll run about 13 or 14 hours on that one tombstone.
That's awesome.
Yep.
That is crazy. So speaking of automation and all of that, Henry Holsters asked, thinking about integrating new tools and processes when you have, such a strong emphasis on running unattended, what does it take to tip the balance where you start experimenting? Like you talk about how your prices are linked to cycle times. When do you say enough is enough? Let me start playing with some new tooling or some new programming or something like that.
A lot depends on your mood at the time and how much risk you're willing to take on. At the same time, sometimes you also have to. So, sometimes you got to step back a little bit too, and just think like, there's always that grass is greener syndrome, where you get something and it works great, but like, maybe I can squeeze a little bit more out of it. But once you get burned enough times, you realize, you know what, it's you may have already gotten to like the 90% mark, and maybe it's time to think of other ways to improve your process rather than trying to squeeze out that last 10%. And so in our case, we looked at horizontal. We started out with a horizontal because I knew that was the way to go. It was really by default, because in order to make the larger 6-inch cast iron vises, they're a little bit too big for a 5-axis machine. And I wanted to be able to run everything in 2 setups rather than 6. So the horizontal was the natural machine for that application. But then, so over time, it would be like, all right, well, we'll get pallet pools, we'll get this, get that. But at some point you think, all right, a 21 pallet pool machine costs about triple what our original machine cost. So then you're tempted by like, okay, if I got more of the 2 pallet machines, but then got these robots to come in and have one robot shared between 6 different machines, and then your mind runs wild. But once you try even a really basic setup, you kind of come back down to earth and think, all right, you know what, maybe I bit off a little bit more than I can chew. So I think robots are great if you have a small, high volume, low mix. But for us, we've realized that we're more of a medium volume, medium mix. And so for us, horizontals are what works, and subspindle lathes work. For a while, I was kicking around the idea of a huge DMG Mori NTX. That would be their 5-axis mill turn.
Mm-hmm.
But after sitting on that for a few months, I'm like, all right, back down to earth. You know, the promise of being able to run a huge family of parts start to finish was enticing, but in the end, it's like, all right, well, if one thing goes wrong, you know, what are you going to do with this huge machine that if it can't do what it was originally designed for? Because realistically, those huge, all of those big mill turns are really designed for a lot of aerospace and defense work. So that's where they can justify that kind of expense. For us, building work holding, building bench vises, you know, it's not quite that kind of. You can't put it in the same category as like an Apache landing gear or something like that.
Right. Totally. Yeah. So we've had a few questions. Both Easton and Alex from MLOC Work Holding. We're curious, how do you deal with the volume and mix of chips that you handle, and like what are the side effects of running all this cast iron in your machines?
Okay. Yep. So chip control is really important. That starts with the machine. So we've learned the hard way because we were spoiled with DMG Mori machines that have historically. I know there's people on the internet who legitimately may have had poor experiences with certain machines, but in our experience, DMG Moris have always been extremely good with chip management. So we were spoiled by that. And then once we started checking out some other brands that didn't have such good chip management, we started getting floods, overflows, and stuff like that.
Yikes.
So it all starts with the machine. If the machine is designed to handle those chips, then that's 50%. Half the battle's already won. Next is making sure, especially like a 21 pallet pool or even a 6300, that the 630 millimeter tape horizontal that hogs so much chips, it will fill up a barrel pretty quickly. So easy solution to that is just to get a bigger barrel, right? So we're using 1 yard self-dumping hoppers now. And that really took us a long time to get. We didn't even grab our first one until maybe like 2 years ago, because they're like $1,500, $1,600 a piece.
Wow.
It's one of those things where you do what you have to do initially. So when we first started, we used plastic recycling bins that we got for free, and then just kind of graduated, went little by little, moved our way up, and then finding people to take them and recycle them. That's really a trial and error sort of deal, unless you happen to have a really good friend who knows some really good recyclers. But we went through like 4 or 5 until we found someone who's really reliable and honest. So aluminum's obviously always going to be a little bit more, both easier and more difficult. Easier because they're lightweight and you get money for them. Harder because they fill up a drum much more quickly. Cast iron chips, cast iron's as dirty as everyone says it is. There's no like magic bullet to dealing with cast iron dust, but I think the key to that material is that it's a lot less damaging to the machine than what people think. I think people are under the impression that you run cast iron even for a short period of time, and it's equivalent to there is graphite dust in there, but it's really not the same as like an abrasive grinding dust. It's just not even in the same category. So it smears all over the place. So you get like the sludge in their coolant tanks.
Ooh.
and it clogs filters, so you have to make sure your filters are actually big enough. You don't want a too fine of a filter because they'll get clogged up pretty quickly. 500 micron is probably the minimum, and yeah, in the end it's just learning to deal with it. If your shop has to be surgically clean, then maybe it's not the right material for you. But in terms of the worries that it'll get onto the roller guides or the ball screws and start wreaking havoc on the tolerances, that's really not too big of an issue in our experience. The oldest our 6300 has been in operation for about 5 years now, cutting cast iron day in and day out, and so far no issues with tolerances.
Do you have to deal with ventilation of any kind for the dust?
Yeah, that's always a good idea. So whether you have a mist collector that has some provisions for dry dust, or just general ventilation in the shop, that's always definitely a good idea. I think it'd be recommended in any shop, whether you're running dusty materials or not, but it's definitely very important in a cast iron machine environment.
Interesting. Okay.
So that kind of leads into another question we had from Jeff from the Instant Machinist Discord, and he asked, "What kind of maintenance and upkeep do you do to your machines since you have such long unattended operations and all of that?"
Yeah, it's really about keeping things clean. Um, we pay DMG Mori or whoever else is available at the time to come do PM on our machines on occasion, and then we kind of do it in the interim. And one thing that we didn't do as well as we could have was actually cleaning the heat sinks for all the servo drives. That gets gummed up pretty good. It's just the mix of both dust and the misted coolant. But I mean, for the most part, it's just keeping things clean. Despite the 6300 being our dirtiest machine, the tech said our hydraulic fluid was some of the cleanest he's ever seen.
Wow.
Which is a good thing. So it's just really hard to say. So, but yeah, keeping stuff clean is number one, and then for the most part, the machines are generally pretty much maintenance for. They're self lubricating, so always make sure the lubricant's topped off. Always use quality lubricant. I've heard some techs say that long-term damage is almost always caused by clogged lines, and that's going to be more prevalent in maybe boxway machines than the newer roller machines. So, but still, definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah. And little things do start failing over time. So let's see. For the most part, we haven't had any major issues with any of our machines. The tool changer air cylinder is getting, some of the seals are starting to die. So we put a little maintenance into rebuilding those. LED lights burn out. Way cover scrapers, they eventually just explode, and it happens especially if you machine a lot of steel with a lot of curly 6s and 9s. Those chips just clump together, and once they get under a way cover, they just scrape back and forth an infinite number of times until the way seals basically break off. So that's another maintenance point. Hydraulic cylinders, definitely a good idea to keep those in check. But other than that, not a whole lot.
Okay.
So, in addition to, I guess, upkeep, you talked about having duplicate and redundant tooling. Like, what does a typical day when you come in after a night run look like? Like, are you replacing tooling in every single machine while it continues to run, or like how do you guys handle tool management and things like that?
Yeah, so usually we've through trial and error we set the timers, and then once that's set in place, we basically track down the worst offenders, the ones that are having to be changed every day, and then those get duplicates to the point where we can comfortably go a day or two without changing anything. and then all at once change out a bunch of stuff. So some tools don't have any redundance at all. Actually, a lot of tools don't have any redundance at all, and then some tools might have 4 in the same machine.
Can you give us an
So
example of one that has 4?
yeah, so on our Delta Vise, we make heavy use out of 3/8 inch variable fluid end mills. So those have a lot of duplicates. One of the workhorses in our facility is a Mitsubishi AHX face mill. So those are on every single machine, and they all have two tools in the machine and two tools outside of the machine at any given time. So every machine actually has 4.
Wow.
Half-inch end mills, they almost always have duplicates in varying amounts. Drills rarely have duplicates. Any drill that might only, like let's say we have a part that has a 1 hour cycle time, and if drilling accounts for like 30 seconds, we'll actually use high-speed steel rather than any other material for that drill, because it's not worth it to save a few seconds and then have have a tool that has a much worse failure mode. Because high-speed steel drills, even though they're slow, they could be like, it could be missing an entire flute and it'll still drill. So,
So do you have any laser tool breakage detection or anything like that, or is it all strictly time based?
we do some tool touch offs. It's a physical tool touch off, and our newest machine actually has one of those little wands that are inside the tool changer that checks for tool breakage.
Oh, cool.
But that's generally for it's really limited to small tools, really small end mills, drills, taps, that kind of thing. So it's definitely not the first line of defense. The first line is always going to be the actual timers.
Gotcha. So what is the hardest part for you to machine currently? Like what of all of your line, what's by far the hardest?
So it used to be the third operation of our big vises, just because there was so much going on. But it's matured to a point where we haven't had any issues with that for years. So for us, it's easy. But if we had to do it from scratch, and let's say we erased our memories and had to start over, then that would probably be the hardest. But currently, I guess it would be. Kind of the same thing. We've kind of gone through all the obstacles and figured it out. But the finishing operations on the Delta Vises, and in particular because the Delta Vises are hardened to around Rockwell 58 to 60. So,
Oh wow, I didn't realize they were that hard.
Yeah, but in terms of machining techniques and all that stuff, that's it's not difficult. You just have to really pay attention to the tool life, because when the tool life goes bad, or when the tools go bad, they don't really break in finishing operations. They dull, and then they just don't cut any material. So I've had instances where I would measure something and be off by like 2 or 4 tenths, and I'd offset the tool by 2 or 4 tenths, and then it would come out exactly the same. And then I would just keep offsetting. At some point, I would offset it like 3 thou, and it's barely the part has stayed exactly the same size. And then I replaced the tool, and then all of a sudden it's 3 thou oversized. I'm like, oh crap! Like this is like an internal feature, so I just blew the tolerance.
Oh,
and the tricky part of this is that it's like I said earlier, the timing is not consistent. One tool will last 120 minutes. The next tool might last 60. So it gets a little bit difficult, because then you're offsetting. Like, all right, it's not working anymore. Got to change the tool. And you got to remember to undo the offset and start over from 0, so you don't overshoot.
so when you come across tools that are behaving like that, like they're not consistent, is that an indication that you need to reevaluate your tool path or your tool choice, or do you just set a really low threshold and then just replace it early?
I think initially we always try to. I believe in less is more. So I don't try to react too much, because sometimes it is just like, okay, we hit a hard spot, or that tool is bad. No need to completely reset our timers. No need to completely reevaluate the process. Let's just chalk it up to bad luck and just start over, or continue but start over from a new tool. It's when stuff starts repeatedly going bad, and then eventually, shit kind of hits the fan, where you either scrap a really high dollar part, or you miss a deadline because we were trying to ignore a problem that had reared its head before. That's when it's like, all right, let's go back to the drawing board and figure out a better way to do this. And so that's one of the ways we actually finally committed to a different process for pre-machining or pre-finishing the tops of our 6-inch vises. So for a long time we were using just standard carbide face mills, but changing them with some frequency. Then we tried different types of ceramic, and sometimes, or in a lot of cases, not all tools are created equal. So just because it doesn't work the first time doesn't mean if you don't try a different brand or a different setup, it won't work the next time. And we finally settled on a really consistent ceramic face mill that gets us to the proper tolerance each time before grinding, because grinding can only do so much. If you end up with a bowed part and you try to grind that, you may end up with a really nicely finished bowed part after you're done.
So you briefly touched on it earlier. What's your quality look like? Like, how do you not what does your quality look like? How do you inspect your parts, and what kind of frequency and mechanisms do you have in place for that?
Yeah, so a lot of the stuff is on. So we don't inspect everything. It's usually just a few parts out of a batch. First line of defense, as usual, is just going to be a guy with micrometers, and then we use height gauges on granite tables and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the nice thing about your product line is it's not, like you said, it's not an aerospace part with a million true positions and tolerances like that. You've got a few holes and a few, parallelisms and flatness and all that stuff. So
right, exactly. Yeah, being a largely rectangular part, it doesn't require us to have a CMM to be able to sweep complex surfaces. So I guess we got kind of lucky there.
Yeah.
And then Eric, I was curious, how many employees do you have right now at your company?
So yeah, we've got 6.
Okay.
So considering the size of our shop, in terms of both the amount of product we move and I guess dollar amount, I guess we would be considered a pretty lightly staffed company, which has its pluses and minuses. But yeah, so for the first 2 years it was just my wife and I. Then the next 2 years it was my wife, me, and my dad. And then the 5th year is when we started hiring people. And we hired people initially a little bit too quickly. And I think that's something we kind of toned back a little bit over the years, where we're just a lot slower in taking on new people. Just because chemistry is such an important part of a good workplace. And right now we've got a really good thing going, so we're hesitant to add too many people too quickly. And I also think sometimes for both the management as well as other employees, a new employee can be a crutch. They can hide problems that you may or may not know exist, but once they're here, it's like, oh, we've got a guy doing that now. But long term, it's just not a good solution. So we always try to find as many ways to automate as possible without getting too crazy. So, like those brush research brushes, we started out using them a long time ago, And then we did some videos for them, and then got even more excited, used even more brush research products. Then there's a point in time where my dad said, like, hey, I'll come do a bunch work with you. He's bored, he wants to do stuff. And then certain things that were deburred in process started getting deburred by hand. And then over time, we're like kind of using on and off, like we would use brushes some places, not others, and it wouldn't really make sense. And then more recently, in the last few years, we kind of brought them back in, and now we're pretty much brushing every part. Especially if you guys notice the bench vise, that almost every flat surface is brushed, just because you can't get that kind of consistency from handwork.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I'm fighting that fight at my day job right now. It's our deburr department does an amazing job, and the ladies down there are absolutely amazing. But like you said, consistency is key. So
Yep. Yeah, scalability too.
yeah, totally.
If you're lucky enough to get like a really good employee doing a certain task, then you might be in for a lot of disappointment when you try to scale that department up, 2 or 3 times. So
Totally.
that we always kind of keep that in mind.
So speaking of kind of managerial kind of stuff, Jake from Yates Precision wanted to know what kind of ERP system do you guys use?
Yeah, so people will probably be interested to know that we don't use one.
I think
Yeah.
they would definitely be interested.
Yeah. I mean, we're lucky that we can get away with that because we don't do a lot of contract manufacturing, and at this point, we don't do any. I definitely see the value in ERP, but like pretty much all software systems, it's only as good as the people using it. And that's not to say our people couldn't use it. I mean, all of our guys are extremely well qualified and could definitely do that, but it's not necessarily a productive task to be populating or data entry in an ERP system. So if it's not used properly, then it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. So that's one of those things where I evaluated that a long time ago. We looked at all the usual suspects, job boss, etc. And we thought to ourselves, all right, well, it's going to be a pretty steep learning curve to learn all that stuff. Or we can just make the production system a lot easier to where we don't need it. And that's kind of what we did, where we invested in the pallet pools and all that stuff, and then built everything off production schedules. Because once your production schedule is maxed out, what's the ERP going to do for you? Just confirm what you already know, right?
Yeah, that's a fair point. So, what do you use for inventory tracking then? Because you got, I mean, obviously you guys have something, but is it just website based or?
Yeah, it's just our accounting software.
Okay.
With a combination of our web software or our online shopping cart. They're not perfectly integrated, but they're close enough.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, if that works for you guys, that's fantastic. Like you said, most of those softwares are 100% garbage in, garbage out, and it ends up just making busy work for you if it's not working for you. So I totally appreciate that answer.
Yep, I worked with a company. So during our 3rd and 4th years, we shared a shop with another company. It was actually my friend's shop, and their company liked to use Gantt charts, that timeline project management software.
Mm-hmm.
And I helped them out on a few occasions with different sort of manufacturing jobs and stuff like that. And what I noticed was, I mean, they for the most part it worked for them, but that particular type of project management software, it's really easy for it to get out of control. Where you have like, all right, this is going to take 3 days, this is going to take 4 days, and they're just guessing the whole time. And then you have 10 people guessing at a bunch of stuff, and you either end up with a project that takes a year that should take a lot less than that, or you end up with some ridiculous stretch goal of like, yeah, we're gonna have all this done in a month, and they come back in a month and nothing's done at all. So for me, when witnessing that, I was like, I don't know, it's so hard to predict stuff and get everybody on the same page. For Orange Vise, is that really going to help us? And up until this point, luckily, we haven't needed it.
Well, that's good. It's definitely less of a headache for you guys to set up too. So,
Yep.
So we had another question that's kind of a hypothetical from Windmill Motorsports. He said, say you were fixturing 10 smaller parts within like a 20 by 12 work envelope. What do you consider the most cost-effective approach to high-density work holding and something like that? So I guess a small VMC.
Right. So that'd probably be probably the twin delta vise pallets. Those are usually pretty cost effective, especially if you can make your own. So we freely put up the models online, so you can make your own, and they're pretty easy to make. A lot of people don't want to make them themselves, so we're more than happy to provide a quality product, and that's in the consumable areas too. But yeah, I think pallets are for small machines like that where high density is the goal. I think pallets. In his case, because it's 20 by 12, and he wants to clamp 10 parts, so it might be a little bit difficult to try to cram in 10 delta vises in such a small footprint.
Right.
But, for higher flexibility though, pallets, well, that's where the pallets lack is, once you machine into them, there's only so much you can do before it's pretty much spent.
So actually, real quick, speaking of your pallet systems, what made you start this whole new Delta line versus the pinned pallets that you had on your old line?
Yeah, that was customer feedback. I mean, we've noticed it too, but definitely a lot of customer feedback. And primarily, it'd be the people who are saying like, "Oh man, I've got my pallet loaded up with like 60 pounds worth of parts, and then they're aligned on these super tight dowel pins. How do I take them in and out more easily?" And that's kind of where that idea was born, because the whole idea of the Delta system is it's a triangular wedge with a dovetail built in, so it locates whatever it's clamping on 3 axes, and as soon as you loosen it, it's basically completely loose. There's no more alignment left. So if you're loading a heavy pallet and you got to reach in, you can basically essentially just plop it in place. Obviously, you don't want to scratch the surfaces, but it's a lot easier ergonomically than trying to mount a pallet onto pins.
Gotcha.
Yeah, totally. So it's self-aligning, self-righting, all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I use it for one of my vacuum pallets, and it's really nice. That's for sure.
Nice. Right on.
Then another question we had, and I think Dylan wrote this, but I agree. But when can we expect another video series?
Yeah, that was mine, because the first one was fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to another one.
Yeah, we're definitely excited about getting some of that up and going again. The bench vise video was like the first one we've done in years, and it's just one of those things where we just need to. It's in the pipeline, but just a matter of when we get to that pipeline. But yeah, certainly now that I feel our product is pretty well rounded in terms of vises, I've run out of excuses to put off more videos.
Yeah.
Because back when we were still developing our bench vise or our delta vises, I'm like, well, I kind of want to have our videos show both types of vises. And then once the delta vises were out, I was like, well, in my videos, I kind of want to show how we, grip on a tool holders and stuff like that. And it'd be so much cooler to do it in a bench vise. and now that that's out, I've basically run out of excuses. So I got to make some videos now.
Yeah. I mean, it would be one thing if you weren't good at it, but you are excellent at production. So it's. I mean, you've put out better videos than a lot of manufacturers, large scale manufacturers have. So it's we want more.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that.
And then to go with the videos, I noticed that on almost all of them that have music, it looks like you make that music.
Yeah, the most recent one was just stock music, but most of the older ones I basically produced them just on a computer.
So what
So
software do you use for that? Because I play around with that, and it's just kind of cool to see someone else doing it.
yeah, I'm using Logic
Okay.
for the works for the workstation, and then I'm using mostly Native Instruments Complete for all the software instruments.
Okay.
And occasionally, when I'm feeling up for it, I'll put in a little bit of electric guitar or something like that. But for
Very
the most
cool.
part, I'm not much of a performing artist because when I'm put on the spot, I can't cut a track start to finish without making some sort of mistake. So I'm more of a you know plop down a draft and then continuously refine until it's where I want it to be. So that's what I like about electronic music is that it allows me to do that.
Very cool.
So I think the last question we had written at least was what's next for Orange Vice? Are there do you have any products that you think will, I mean, you kind of briefly touched on hydraulic vices, but do
Right.
you see expanding into other markets soon, or is it refining your current lines? Is there anything you can share with us?
Yeah. So I guess first things first, we should really flesh out the bench vise lineup. And by lineup, I'm talking about really the accessories. I don't think we're gonna. People have asked about different sizes of the bench vise, but that's something further down the line. But I think having a good selection of jaws available for bench vises, at least to start out, would be probably a pretty good thing. And then just showing other people how we would do it, so that other people can also make jaws, sell them to their markets and stuff like that. That was kind of the idea of the whole thing, was to create a platform where other people can get involved in it. Beyond that, I briefly mentioned earlier wanting to have some precision hand tools with some wire EDM parts. I think that's where we're going to be exploring our kind of our next phase. We've been kicking around the idea of maybe torque wrenches, stuff like that. Not really reinventing the wheel, but just making them a little bit more round is the way I look at it.
Very cool.
Yep.
And then you've I think it's fairly recent you started doing these full machine subplates and all of that. I figured we should at least touch on that. I mean, I bought one, so of
Yep.
course I've got a little bit of a vested interest.
Cool.
But that's a new product of yours. Are you doing them custom if people wanted to come to you for their specific machine, or are you only offering them to certain machines currently? Or
Yeah, they're custom. I think right now we made a few of them, and then we didn't actively advertise them because we wanted to get a little more feedback. Um, the drawback of being an early adopter is there might be some small issues here and there, but then the benefit is anybody who's an early adopter will usually bend over backwards to make sure that it works properly. And so, uh, for the most part, performance wise, the product is to our liking. I don't think we haven't noticed any issues pop up. It's really going to be more about the manufacturing, just figuring out the way to streamline everything. I think we've got it pretty decent, but it still has some work to be done there. Any type of product that's that big is always going to be a challenge. So like your subplate, I think, was 36 by 16 or thereabouts,
Mhm.
and it's aluminum, hard anodized, so not super heavy, but it's still a little bit bulky.
oh yeah,
So
yeah, we couldn't believe it. I mean, it came loaded with the 0 points on it, and like just
yep,
trying to move that thing around the shop. Like, thank goodness we have a pallet jack because we would
right,
not be doing that by hand.
yep.
But
But yeah, that's something we do plan to expand. Maybe not aggressively at this point, but yeah, we're just um, like I said before, we like things to grow organically. So when people we've got our hands full with everything else. So if someone asks for something that's maybe we've teased on Instagram, we'll be open to making them. But it's one of those things where we kind of take it a little bit at a time. to make sure we do it. We get it done right. Because for one, it's one thing also for me to be able to do something, but it can be a lot more challenging to figure out how I'm going to train all the other employees to figure out how to do it. So that's always something that needs to be taken into consideration.
Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that's about it, unless you have something else, Dylan.
No. But Eric, go ahead and plug, all your social, where people can find your vices, all that stuff. We
Cool. Yeah. So our Instagram is our primary social media channel. It's Orange Vise Official, all one word. We're on YouTube as well. I think there's a link on the Instagram, so that's where I'd go first. And then just our website, orangevise.com.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to come on. And once again, we're both Orange Vise customers, and I love my Vise, and I'm definitely going to be buying from you in the future.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Eric.
All right.
Eric.
Thanks.